Well, konnichiwa. I'm Joshua Walker, and I have the privilege of working here at the Japan Society. Now, this is called the Japan House, and in many ways, you're welcome to the Japan House. I've spent most of the day with this great group today. I have big expectations, particularly for Ambassador Thornton, who's up here, who's going to be making sure that they behave themselves. But, you know, this has been going on, the kind of U.S. Japan bilateral conference with the National Committee on American Foreign Policy for like the last 30 years. And I have to say, I can't think of a more relevant and important time to do this. And I have to say, having spent a lot of time this morning, you're in for a treat. There's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of depth. It's like an iceberg. You're only getting the tip of the bit there. So I hope those of you that are watching at home, those of you that are gathered here at 333 47th Street at Japan Society will support this initiative. It's really important for initiatives like this. I want to recognize the chair of our board, Merit Janow, who's here as well, and thank her for being here. I want to recognize, of course, it's very confusing. The current acting ambassador of the Consul General of Japan, who's not the Mikio Mori, but Kazuya Mori. He likes to call himself Little Mori. I would never do such a thing. But we're really excited to have him here, and thanks for the support that makes this possible. So with that, let me just simply welcome I would never call you Big Susan because that just has wrong connotations, but Ambassador Elliott to the forefront to be able to talk about what we're doing here today. And I'm going to keep you laughing the whole time. So with that, thank you so much for being here. And Ambassador Elliott, the floor is yours.
You have taken me off guard because nobody ever called me, like, I guess I'm Big Sue and that's Little Sue, or since I'm the older of the two of us, I'll take the Big Sue and the bigger. But anyway, in size as well as whatever. But anyway, thank you, Joshua, for that great welcome. And, you know, it's really great to be back at the Japan Society. I don't think we've really done a program here since before the pandemic. So we are really pleased to be here in the Japan House. And it kind of reminds me, I was in Washington, D.C. last week. And of course, the cherry blossoms are in full bloom. There are thousands of tourists who are there. And I really think, you know, just in starting off our discussion tonight, it kind of highlights the long-standing, strong, and ties, not only diplomatic, but cultural ties between our two countries. And I could think of no better, if you haven't seen them, you know, take the train tonight and go down and see them because they're at full bloom and it's wonderful. But anyway, as Joshua said, I'm Susan Elliott. I'm the Big Sue of the organization. I'm going to start calling myself Big Sue. Anyway. That's like Large Marge, if you ever watched, I won't say the name of the movie. But anyway, tonight, our discussion is a new golden age in U.S. Japan relations. And again, we're here in the Japan House, so no better place to host it. For those of you who don't know a lot about the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, Hans Morgenthau formed us in 1974, so we've been around. Last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary, so we're now at 51. But his mission was to help resolve conflicts that threaten U.S. national interests and policy through policy and diplomacy. And we've been organizing dialogues like the one we hosted today for many, many years. We don't only talk about security issues in Northeast Asia, but we talk about really any issue, as our founder mentioned, that might threaten U.S. security interests around the world. But we also bring together people in conflict, and that's something that really started in the 1990s, in trying to bring people and have unofficial dialogues, especially in places like between mainland China and Taiwan, where there are no official dialogues, and that we can serve as a conduit for bringing people together, coming up with ideas that people have from all sides, and then writing reports with recommendations that we can all agree to, and hopefully that our governments will at least read and think about and maybe adopt. But our members are a vibrant, community, and we hope that we're making a lasting impact on U.S. foreign policy. And just to tell you, if you go to our website, I'll make a little plug, ncfp.org. We have memberships. It shows you the reports you can read, the kinds of activities we have, like tonight's program. So for those of you especially who are joining us virtually, I hope you will take a look at our website and see the kinds of things that we do and the things that we're planning to do over the next few months. You know, tonight, as Joshua said, this discussion couldn't come at a more critical time. The U.S.-Japan alliance, to me, remains a pillar of peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region. I think we can all agree on that. And I was very pleased to see that one of President Trump's first invitations was for a Washington summit with Prime Minister Ishiba. So that I think we should take, as I said today, I was cautiously optimistic that we should take that as a good sign. The two declared, that's why we stole their name for the title tonight, a new golden age of U.S.-Japan relations. Yet it seems clear that, you know, even though they announced this, there are lots of technical and hurdles that need to be overcome, not only in global security architecture, but perhaps trade disputes or upcoming trade disputes, shifting international norms and institutions. So how should the U.S. and Japan be working to meet the security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region and the instability that is or could develop in the international system? So tonight we welcome prominent experts Ken Jimbo and Christopher Johnstone. And for those of you who didn't participate today, they've already had a rehearsal. They have been talking all day, and so we know they're going to really be good tonight. It was like the matinee, and now you're here for the main performance. And Susan, Susan Thornton, is the director of our Forum on Asia-Pacific Security and a former U.S. diplomat who's an expert in the region and way beyond. So as soon as the discussion is finished, we'll take questions from the audience, and I believe we can also take questions from the virtual audience. And then if you can stay long enough, we're going to have a reception afterwards so we can get to know one another over a glass of wine. So I'm going to turn the program now over to Susan, and thank you all very much, not only for being here, but for supporting the work of the National Committee. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. I won't talk about how many times when I was a kid I was sung that song, Wake Up Little Susie. So I guess it's going to be back around the halls of the NCAFP. But welcome to all of you. It's so great to be here in person at the Japan House, and I'm really excited for this conversation. We have two fantastic experts on international relations, U.S.-China relations, U.S.-Japan relations, the region of the Asia-Pacific, and global kind of goings-on in this, what is, I think, a pretty, interesting but changeable, I guess, time in world affairs. And we did have a long discussion about a lot of the changes that are happening, how other countries in the region, especially in the Asia-Pacific region, are thinking about the changes, how they're thinking about grappling with them. But first, let me introduce, to my left is Ken Jimbo Sensei, who is a professor at Keio University in Japan and has also worked in the Japanese government. He's been a senior advisor for the Japanese Ministry of Defense, also a senior advisor at the National Security Commission in Japan, and has a very long career in looking at international relations, Japan and U.S. foreign policy, global affairs, regional and multilateral affairs, and we're just so happy to have his expertise with us tonight. We also have Chris Johnstone, former colleague of mine in the U.S. government. Chris is currently the partner at the Asia Group in Washington, previously was the Japan chair at CSIS, a think tank in Washington. Prior to that, worked in the National Security Council of the Biden administration. He did a couple of stints at the National Security Council working on Northeast Asia security issues, also at our Secretary of Defense office. And prior to that, very, very early, when he was 10 years old, I guess, was an Intel analyst in the U.S. government. So also a very long career looking at these issues, and it's such a privilege for us to be able tonight to tap into their mutual expertise. So to start off, let's dig into the new golden era of U.S.-Japan relations, because as Susan mentioned, there was a summit meeting, a very early summit meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Ishiba in Washington. And there was a very positive joint statement that came out that listed a whole number of areas of cooperation, but we're also looking in a couple of days at so-called Liberation Day here in the United States, which is what the president is calling the unveiling of his reciprocal tariff strategy. And of course, a lot of countries around the world are very concerned about what will come out of that, both in the short term and the longer term. And I think Japan is one of the countries that is looking at what's going to unfold this week and worrying about how it's going to be able to respond. So maybe I'll just turn first to you, Ken, to give us your kind of, assessment of sort of where things stand at the moment in U.S.-Japan relations after the very positive summit meeting, how you think things are going to be coming along in the next sort of few months as we grapple with lots of changes in the U.S.-Japan relationship.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking NECAFB for organizing fantastic full-day conference and this open symposium with all of you, and also for Japan Society, hosting here at the beautiful Japan House. By the way, I also serve as Managing Director of the International House in Japan, where we are the strategic partner of the Japan Society. And so anybody who have a chance to come to Tokyo, please come to Roppongi to visit us at the International House of Japan. So as we call ourselves the new golden age, which is the symbolically powerful term, and this has been exemplified by the result, as mentioned by the Ishiba-Trump summit just had in February. And likewise, as you experienced, that our 2 months and several days since the inauguration of the Trump administration, every single day is a really overwhelming kinds of events that really goes across both domestic and international affairs, and things happening to Canada, Mexico, Panama, Greenland, turning Gaza to Riviera statements, and then the president's negotiation over Ukraine war with Russia in much more preferential manner that how to make a deal for the Ukraine war that you really need to get into the deal with Russia. Under those kind of contexts that I think Japanese government and his foreign policy team were quite anxious about what would be the outcome of Trump administration's foreign policy towards the Asia-Pacific. So Prime Minister Ishiba did a lot of homeworks. I think it's 2 months he spent on dealing with how to deal with the Trump administrations. And then it turned out to be quite successful. And I think that we have come up by confirming a lot of key elements of the U.S.-Japan alliance, United States security commitments to the defense of Japan, including Article 9 coverage of the symbolically important Senkaku Islands, and then to confirm about accumulative efforts of the mutual defense cooperation that we have done in the several decades. And then that very encouraging terminologies like a peace through strengths can really go across the Indo-Pacific regions. And then he also reiterated the ongoing concept of the free and open Indo-Pacific. Those are very much reassuring to commit to the, first of all, continuity of the strategic coordination that we have earned so far, and then also that convincing of the Tokyo and Washington DCs are looking at the same common strategic agenda that we face. And such kind of notion is also reiterated by the President Trump meeting with Prime Minister Modi of India, and then also the Secretary Hexes of the Department of Defense travel to Korea, Philippines. Also reiterated the importance of the existing kind of dynamics that we have. So I think that the golden age of the alliance is I think a result of the lot of efforts that we have done both sides, and both Susan and Chris are part of those kind of engagements in a various I think at the policy coordination that we've done. And I think where we are at the today's U.S.-Japan relationship is I think at the outcome and result of what has been accumulated so far. But I think at the question here, and which I'm going to I think talk in the later phase, is that first of all, why there has been a more continuity in the Indo-Pacific while there are a lot of like a turmoil, I think at the issues that has been rising in the transatlantic relationship. U.S. relations with Europe is currently under strain, and also there are lots of like transactional kind of negotiation has been taking place that is going beyond the kind of traditional understanding of what the United States is trying to engage in the various regions. And I think I do have my hypothesis. Of course, there's a strategic kind of prioritization should be based in how to deal with China and also in the Indo-Pacific there. But at the same time, there has been the growing kind of notion that, as Prime Minister Kishida once mentioned, that the Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow in a different context. But what has been happening today in the transatlantic relationship could potentially take place in the Indo-Pacific in the later phase. So we are in the cautious optimism at this moment, but with a kind of conviction that there should be a lot of like alternatives in coming in the future.
That's very well said, and I thank you so much for leaving us with that great segue to a later question, which we'll come back to. But first, let's go to you, Chris. I mean, I think you spent a lot of time, I know, in the Biden administration working on the sort of strategic landscape of the Indo-Pacific, trying to set sort of an order and a strategy in place that would be durable, would transition through different, changes in administration in the United States. And we did see some of that architecture reappear and be confirmed in the joint statement of the summit. I just wonder, sort of reflecting on the work that was done in the Biden administration, what is it that you were trying to do, maybe, and how do you think it's weathering so far the transition, and how do you hope to see it move in the future? And then we'll get in the next round to the question that Ken raised about that kind of strategic question that's always in the minds of our allies in Asia, which is, can we count on the U.S. for the long term?
Thanks, Susan, and thank you, Susan, and thanks, Josh, for organizing this event and having me here, and for hosting us here tonight in this beautiful place. To reflect a little bit on the Biden years, I mean, I think the animating focus of his team in Asia was on our alliances, both the bilateral alliances with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and Thailand, but then also a really concerted effort to build ties among those allies, to move beyond just a bilateral approach to the region toward what we used to call a minilateral approach, to build cooperation among our partners in a way, the theory went, that would help to reinforce deterrence and to reinforce the kind of regional order that we thought had brought peace and stability to Asia. And this was founded on a view not just that allies are important and good, but that it was in the U.S. interest to have strong allies. We needed strong and capable allies to deal with the security challenges that we had in the region. And so there was an effort not just to strengthen alliances, but to empower our allies in ways that hadn't been done before. So you saw this with nuclear submarines to Australia. You saw this with Tomahawk cruise missiles to Japan, some steps that we took with South Korea. All this premised on the idea that strong allies were both necessary for the United States, but also important to the security environment in the region. The other key feature was building connections across regions in our alliance relationship. So in other words, strengthening the ties between our Asian allies and NATO. There was a concerted effort to do this, not in a formal way, but to build habits of dialogue, information sharing, operational cooperation when possible. So there was this thing called the IP4, the Indo-Pacific 4, where the leaders of Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand would attend the NATO summit every year to share perspectives on challenges in the Indo-Pacific. So that was the Biden administration's approach. What do we see now? We really see, from my point of view, kind of a tale of two regions. On the one hand, just as Jimbo Sensei said, a real pulling back of U.S. engagement in Europe. A lot of pressure on Europeans by the Trump administration to spend more on defense, to take responsibility for their own security, and a shift away from Europe on the part of the United States toward the Indo-Pacific. So it's striking to me how you have a real departure in the U.S. approach to Europe, and a lot of continuity, I would argue, at least in the documents that have been released, in the U.S. approach to Asia and in the relationship with Japan in particular. So both Prime Minister Ishiba's visit to the White House, if you read that joint statement, there's all sorts of stuff in there that sounds like a lot of continuity from what came before. An emphasis on U.S. Japan ROK cooperation, an effort to sort of strengthen the command, what we call the command relationships between Japan's new operational command and U.S. forces in Japan. The agenda that we have together, broadly similar. You saw that also with Modi's visit to the White House. And Secretary Hegseth's visit over the weekend, I think, sort of further amplified that, I would argue. So we now have two data points, visits that sort of signaled, I think, a continued focus on and a strengthening of, and a lot of continuity in the U.S.-Japan relationship. I think the question, though, is the one that you sort of raised at the outset, Susan, which is, you know, on Liberation Day, if in fact there are actions to impose tariffs on essentially all U.S. trading partners, including our closest allies and partners, including Japan and some pretty critical sectors to the Japanese economy, how do we do these two things at once? How do you continue to pursue a robust security cooperation agenda at the same time that you have, frankly, a more challenging trade policy that creates political dynamics in both countries? So I think there's a lot more to come.
Yeah, very well foreshadowed. So I guess just to follow, though, on those comments, I mean, what do you think, what explains the difference, or what explains the tale of two regions, if you will? I mean, what is the difference between the European theater and the Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific theater? And getting to Ken's point earlier, you know, what is the strategic question that the Trump administration is trying to resolve, if you see it that way?
Yeah, so I suspect that if you ask different people in the Trump administration, they would answer the question differently. But I guess the way I think about it, you know, I think the Biden administration's philosophy was that security in Europe and security in the Indo-Pacific are linked. That what happens in one region will have implications for the other. And so that drove a belief that the defeat of Putin and his invasion of Ukraine would serve to deter aggression in East Asia. And I think this really was captured by this famous Kishida phrase, Ukraine today could be East Asia tomorrow, the sense that things are connected, right? That was the view. I think many in the Trump administration view the problem differently. I think the view is, number one, that Europeans can and should take more responsibility for their own security. But also, when you start to look in military terms, the truth is that there is a trade-off. When we give defense equipment to Ukraine, that means that there's not defense equipment available in another theater. And in fact, there were lots of examples of capabilities, munitions, and things being moved from the Indo-Pacific to Europe. And I think it's the view among at least some in the Trump administration that that's ultimately bad for deterrence, that that taxing military capability in the Indo-Pacific to support Ukraine served to undermine deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. I think that's a very interesting intellectual debate and an important one. My own view was that defeating Putin was more important than how many missiles were available for one theater or another. But I think that is the philosophical underpinning of the different approach.
And Ken, I mean, I want you to take up this question as well, but also to talk to the specifics of the challenges in the East Asian theater, maybe in comparison with what's going on in Europe. We haven't talked about the Middle East and what kind of resources the U.S. is deploying there, but it seems to be a constant point of tension in our strategy that we're trying to, turn more toward the Indo-Pacific theater, and we always keep getting pulled off. So that's one question. But the other issue is sort of the economic side, which Chris raised. In the Biden administration, there wasn't a lot of economic interaction going on in the Indo-Pacific, and that was a kind of shortcoming, I think, that was seen as part of that policy. But now we have something that's seen as even more kind of if you will, threatening to the economies of the region, which is this pretty severe trade war that we believe will be sort of launched on Wednesday. And how does that play in, as Chris was mentioning, this kind of tension in the alliance?
Well, first on the Europe versus Asia, and I believe that many of the audiences are much more expertise than I am, but I think that there has been the philosophical approach difference between the Biden administration and Trump administration on this regard. Basically that my understanding of the U.S. grand strategy is based on the global engagement, and with doing that, you really need to have allies who are deployed, and then the access bases, and then what kind of a global order can eventually benefit the national interests of the United States. So like outside, global, inside, those kind of approaches. And I think that the current Trump administration is looking at the approach quite opposite manner. It's all the America first, and starting from the America, and then to look out geographically, as if that the continental geopolitics is on there is play in the United States. In that context, that they look at the resources of the United States is not limitless. So resource scarcity is the one condition, and then to think about how to prioritize, to allocate those resources. And then many of those so-called prioritizers try to think that the Indo-Pacific is the consequential theater, and then how much that the United States can really reallocate the resources in order to deal with the strategic competition vis-a-vis China. So and it is true that Indo-Pacific has been, we are surrounded by the increasingly severe security environment. China is on the rise almost constantly, that they can constantly have the air and naval superiority against any neighboring states, including Japan, and then to increase the capability to deny U.S. access into the region, so that the whole strategic context has been transcended into the very severe strategic circumstances. In dealing with managing the status quo in the region, you really have to allocate the resources more purposefully than ever before. But I agree with Chris that whether that kind of the trade-offs or the zero-sum type of the allocation is really the strategic interest for both of us. For example, having a deal with Putin and having a kind of ceasefire agreement between Ukraine and Russia in Russia's favor, in terms of how Russia doesn't really think that their kind of action to change the status quo by force cannot be met by the cost associated with what we want to impose upon them. And that could be the lessons learned by many of those authoritarian actors who wish to change the status quo by force, which is not the kind of consequences where all the allies may want to draw, to be received by those authoritarian leaders. So definitely, I know that it is a lot of agendas to be simultaneously needs to be pursued, but I don't think there is the complete kind of trade-off or the zero sum should be pursued by both. So that's number one. Secondly, some people in Tokyo still think that why there's a more continuity in the Indo-Pacific rather than in comparison with the other region is because this is the interval period of time before that the president and his team will make a grand bargain with Beijing and also those. And also, it has been attempted in 2018 with Pyongyang, with North Korea, or the denuclearization deal, at the expense of the decreasing commitments to the allies in South Korea. And why do you think it won't really happen over China by looking at the recomposition of the false postures and economic deal for those allies? So this kind of, I think, assumptions is something that Tokyo is increasingly being concerned about. And finally, on the economics, Liberation Days and how it's tried to entail. Japan has been promoting together with the United States about adapting ourselves in the new competitive environment in the economic domain. And it is the rise of the economic security agenda. It is not globalization, free access, the value chain across the group all around, but it's been securitized in a way that the strategic assumption overshadowing in the context of the economy and our business, activities. And that has to be regulated through the upgrading of our export control, internal import restrictions, and critical technologies, preservations, and all sorts of things need to be carried on through a much more tighter strategic base of the economic agenda that we are dealing with. And I think that this is a very kind of non-economical way to increase the weighing costs for the private sector activities at the rationale that the security is important, strategy important, but in order to secure the kind of the economical way to to make our economic vibrant, I think it is important to promote the so-called friend-shoring ideas among friends and allies. So that I think those kind of economic transaction, in our assumption, has to be pursued together with like-minded countries. So if those kind of measures, the measures will be conducted in the context of how to create the kind of regional economic resiliency, that is fine. But I think that the measures are only targeted to how to deal with America First policy that creates, I think, the possible strains with all the like-minded states in the region.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to sort of foot stomp that these economic security measures like export controls, trying to keep technology out of the hands of undesirable actors, is only going to work if you do it together with everybody who produces these items. You can't just do it on your own without having it coordinated with other producers, because it'll defeat the whole purpose of the export controls. And that is true in a lot of these different fields of trying to work on supply chain, for example, diversification, et cetera. We don't need to make everything within this narrow land borders of one country. We need to be able to have multiple sources of supply in order that if one gets cut off, you can go to others. But this has kind of been turned on its head a little bit, I think, is the idea in the current administration. I mean, you mentioned a lot of different agendas to be pursued here, but one of the things that hasn't come up yet, but which we talked about today in our session, in the closed door session, is the idea that the U.S. and Japan are basically not only security partners, not only economic partners, but we also have shared values. And that, you know, this is something that we have worked very hard over the years to try to promote and try to make sure that there is a rules-based system in the world that will help us to promote kind of power being devolved to smaller countries that might not have as much weight in the system, and that if we didn't have rules governing the international economic system and other aspects of international interaction and engagement, that these powers would be diminished and would feel very much kind of coerced. So one of the things that I think Japan has done very admirably is to try to continue to uphold a lot of the institutions and international rules that make international trade flow and make it hopefully somewhat more fair. Now, we know there are a lot of abuses in this system by bigger countries like China, for example, and other countries, but I think Japan's taking up the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, transforming it into the CPTPP, and bringing a lot of Asian countries on board to continue that effort is one of the things that is quite, I think, remarkable that Japan was able to do that, and it's one of the things that we hope Japan can continue to do to sort of be the standard bearer of this rules-based system and of these institutions that, while they may not be perfect, they do actually do a lot to regulate conflict and keep it in the domain of below the level of military conflict and enable us to trade goods and have international commerce. I don't know how you see the future of the agenda for shared values between the U.S. and Japan, but I imagine that's getting more difficult, and the Ukraine issue comes into play here because that's the primary example people think of when they think about this change from sort of the values that the U.S. was espousing on these kinds of conflicts versus where the Trump administration may be on these kinds of conflicts. But for Japan, it makes it a little bit difficult to sort of change your position overnight. And I'd love to get your reflections on the sort of role that you see Japan playing in the shared values agenda, the standing up for and continuing these rules-based institutions that have been the sort of underpinning for this international economic flows that we have currently. And then I think also just Japan's done an awful lot with the Global South in terms of development projects and outreach. China, of course, has done a lot in this area as well. There's been this kind of maybe not so secret competition between the two of you, but I mean, the outreach to the Global South is something that the U.S. has talked about, but not maybe done as much as we should have done, and now seem to be pulling back from a little bit. And I'd love to get your reflections on that. You, yeah.
Well, I think you mentioned quite a lot.
You don't have much time.
Right. First of all, I think Japan's upholding of liberal international order, rule-based international system, try to sustain the TPP standards by creating a CPTPP, which is the rule-based economic order in the regions, supporting for international law, including the UN and UN-related organizations, and the development aids, are not really the kind of rhetorical engagement by the Japanese government. It is our critical national interest that we really need to uphold the rule-based international order. By imagining that Japan is a trading state and we're importing the oils from the Middle East, LNG probably from the United States, and trading as a trading nation, we definitely need to have the access to the important critical locations. Security of the sea lanes of communication is pivotal, so that alliance, regional networks, international system, and the nations adhere to the international law is the must for our security and prosperity. So we are committing to a rule-based international order from the national security point of view. So this is, I think, a slightly kind of approach differences by listening to some of the current administration leaders saying as if that they are very much antagonistic towards those kind of liberal international order concepts by disengage, by knowing about the major disengagement from the international development agenda, withdrawing from the international organizations, and canceling of those kind of personal engagement to the many of the U.S. global projects and commitments seems to be, I think, quite difficult for Japan to accommodate itself, whether U.S. and Japan can really look at the global agenda as a same footing. But at the same time, as I mentioned, this is a philosophical differences, and if we think about this as a critical national interest, and U.S. thinks that the U.S. first agenda does not always, have to have a global reach on that agenda. How much those allies and friends can really complement those, the created vacuums in those fields are now the task that we have to bring our resources into it more seriously. So I think that this is something that we really need to work together with all the other like-minded states in the region. And secondly, you mentioned about Japan's interest in the global south, and that is also quite real in a sense. And I think a recent G7, G20 summit, Japan always brought in this agenda as a critical component of the policy coordination, and partly because it has been triggered by the effect of the outcome of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And Japan has immediately committed ourselves to align together with G7. G7 cohesion is important. And then increasing the like-minded states together with Europe, as Chris mentioned, that we have committed firmly to the NATO and also EU for coordinating process to how to counter Russian aggressions and how to create the sanction regime and so on. And then to try to induce many of the rest of the world. And we found that how difficult it was. You cannot really go to and reach to the global south through the lens of the G7 expansion. You definitely need to have a different kind of scope to engage them, because they do have kind of energy security, food security, supply chain resiliency as their own agenda, and then we definitely need to accommodate the approach in adapting to the reality. So. If you can really cite the former Prime Minister Kishida's the new plan for free and open Indo-Pacific, that is a speech delivered at in Delhi, India, in March 2022, deliberately show that how important that inclusive approach that Japan needs to take in order to provide the official development assistance and connectivity projects in the infrastructures and those the economic agendas, and that can be delivered without attaching like a specific ideologies or anything, because every global south countries may have a kind of different background. So what we need to have is the end results of the quality infrastructure and sustainable developments, which is conducive to what we are now practicing as a business practices. And after all that, those countries can be the friends of the G7, but do not really bring in, at the outset, that the G7 conditionality to those. Those are, I think, the emerging strategy that Japan seems to be, pursuing.
Okay, well, we're counting on you to make it work. Chris, I'll just end with this question. So I want the audience to get their questions ready because we're going to have some audience Q&A after this coming question for Chris Johnstone. You know, I think part of what we've been grappling with all day in our conversation with our Japanese colleagues is this feeling a little bit unmoored about what is the overarching U.S. strategy at this point in its foreign policy. What is the sort of mission of the United States in the international system, in global affairs? And I won't ask you to give us the answer to what that is, but certainly the, you know, big shift in a lot of things in traditional U.S. positions on things like shared values, things like the rules-based order, things like, you know, Russia's aggression in Ukraine makes it feel like it's a kind of a radical shift. But so within that, I mean, I don't know if you want to comment on that or where you think that's going or how we'll come out of that. What do you think the enduring American kind of North Star in the global system is that will come to kind of bring us out of this kind of confusion we seem to be in now? If that resonates with you or not, I don't know. But you know, keeping that in the back of your mind, sort of how do you see the evolution if we look a little bit further out in U.S.-Japan relations or in U.S. relations with the Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific region? How do you see things kind of evolving maybe over the next, say, 10 years?
Big question, Susan. Yeah, I think the first maybe point to make is that this retreat of the United States from its leadership role in upholding the rules-based order isn't new, right? I mean, if you think about TPP, it was the end of the Obama administration that was unable to get TPP through the Congress. Trump then comes into office, immediately pulls us out. There was some speculation that when Biden was elected that he might bring us back into TPP. He did not, right? Decided that the politics and the economics didn't make sense. So this is unfortunately sort of a long-term trajectory for us. And I think unlikely to change soon. I think one of the critical issues from my point of view in the United States is to rebuild a consensus around what America's economic relationship with the world is going to look like. I think we're on the brink of some pretty dramatic measures, possibly as soon as later this week. I also don't think that's going to be the end of the story. American industry and the American people have deep connections with other parts of the world. I think that will ultimately pull the United States back into more of a central role. But I also do think that there is a sense, pretty widely held among the American people, that American power was overstretched, and that maybe the United States didn't benefit from globalization in the ways that perhaps our leaders promised. So I think sort of making the case for an engaged America is something that our future leaders are going to have to take on. But look, I remain at the end of the day optimistic about the U.S.-Japan relationship. I remain optimistic about the future of the U.S. role in the Indo-Pacific. The people-to-people links, the economic links, the national security interests are pretty compelling. And I don't think those are going to go away. And as I said, the joint statement with Prime Minister Ishiba, the work with Modi, does suggest a lot of continuity that can be built upon. But I think that's sort of the long-term story. I think there are going to be some twists and turns that come in the near term.
Yeah. Well, great. No, I think that's well said. I don't know, Ken, if you want to make any comment on that or if we should go to questions. Does anyone have a question? Yes, in the back there. And I think they have a microphone for you. Great. And please introduce yourself, if you would.
Steve Cargman Associates. My question concerns a development in the last day or so. It seems that Korea, Japan, and China met and discussed accelerating their efforts to have a free trade agreement. And this is being perceived as a response to the coming tariffs from the Trump administration, and in effect, driving Japan and Korea into China's arms. I was wondering if you would give your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Ken, I think that's for you.
Well, thank you for mentioning about the recent developments among Japan, Korea, and China. And actually, those three relations have already been set to regularize, having annual summit meetings and foreign ministerial meetings. It has been suspended for some time because of the COVID and also internal political situation that we have. But this has been the regular framework that we have for several years, already a decade, I guess. And secondly, in terms of the free trade agreement, I think many of you have been aware about we have already concluded so-called the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And this is also the regional framework to achieve the free trade. And I think that the coverage of the free trade level is not as high as the TPP, but it's a very important entry point. And this is sometimes called as a quasi free trade framework among Japan, Korea, and China. So the legal basis of how to promote the free trade has already been set under the RCEP framework. And I think that when three countries meet together and to focus on the economic agenda, definitely how to really harmonize the standards for the free trade and investment standards has been, I think, at the regular course of action that we are dealing with. But as you may suspect, this has been driven by the notion that how much we can really stay on for having favorable business practices among ourselves, even though we are part of those friendshoring processes and how to counter Chinese unequal, the economic activities, and there's a lot of things that we need to address to the Chinese economic status. But at the same time, Japan and Korea are in the inclusive, notion of the value chain associated with our economic activities inside China, and more than 10,000 Japanese companies operating in China, and so as the Korean company are doing that. So in order to secure those kind of business standards, we do have a mutual interest in promoting those kind of business standards.
Great. Do you want to add, or should I?
Maybe just make a couple of points on this. I talked at the opening about the focus that the Biden administration had on cooperation with allies and multilateralism and so on. A major purpose of that was to build and sustain solidarity in managing the China challenge, right? To try to keep everyone on the same page about how to engage China economically, politically, militarily, and to try to reach a common sense of what should the boundaries of interdependence with the Chinese economy be. And I think, that I have been and will continue to be fairly critical of the Biden administration's sort of regional economic strategy, but I think you could say they worked pretty hard economically to stay on the same page with Japan, with European partners, at times even persuading those partners to take steps that were counter to their own commercial interests. I think about the semiconductor manufacturing equipment restrictions on exports that the U.S., Japan, and the Netherlands agreed to, basically sacrificing the interests of our firms in the Chinese market, but in the pursuit of this common objective of protecting our technology. The risk of the current approach that we're seeing now is that cooperation begins to break down, and that countries begin to pursue their own perceived unilateral interests in the Chinese market, and that the Chinese in turn will seek to exploit those differences among us. And I think we're seeing some signs of that. My own view is that this Japan ROK China process is potentially a tool that the Chinese will seek to use to that end. But I think it's something we're going to see more of.
Great, thanks you both. Anyone have any other questions? Yeah, Ray.
Just a quick follow-up on that. There was some,
Microphone, because we have online.
yeah, there was hi, Ray Burkhardt. I work a lot with the NCAP. There was an episode during that trilateral meeting in which the Japanese government seemed to be correcting some statement that China had made about what had happened. But when I tried to dig into that, I couldn't quite figure out what happened. Can you explain?
Yeah, that was the earlier foreign ministers meeting,
correct,
right?
that's
Trilateral foreign ministers meeting, and there was the foreign ministers meeting and then the trade meeting that was referenced, but go ahead.
So we had quite a, I think, good ambience in having foreign ministers meetings and expressing mutual concerns, but also to agreed upon the promoting on the mutual interests between two sides. And things happen after the meeting that when China has announced that Japanese government reaffirm about listen carefully about Chinese concerns that they have, delivered during the meetings, and there was a Japanese understanding over those things. And it has been specified, but when it comes to the diplomatic terms of the Chinese concerns, that involves one on the history issues, and the second probably on the Chinese principal approach on Taiwan. And so if we just let those statements alone, it seemingly to admit what has been delivered by Chinese government, so that it's a quite irregular practices, but the Japanese government decided to go against that kind of statement made by Chinese government.
So for people who don't know the diplomatic inside baseball of this, after you have a meeting of two leaders, you each put out a statement about what happened in the meeting, and hopefully, if things are going well, you've both seen each other's statements and agreed that those are okay. But sometimes you don't see the statement, and then the statements come out and there's something in them that you don't like, and if it's a bad problem, then you have to protest, and that is not a good outcome of your very hard work in setting up this meeting. So just to give a little inside baseball there. Did you have a separate question? Yeah, totally different. Okay. Last question, and then we're going to go have a reception and have a chance to chat.
Tom Kono, I'm a retired UN official and currently fellow UN Institute for Disarmament Research. I was shocked by the resolution Security Council adopted February 24th on Ukraine. And the United States and Russia and China, China abstained actually, but they voted the draft resolution which does not label Russia as aggressor, does not call upon Russia to withdraw from international recognized recognized borders, and basically they mean American delegation does not really espouse the territorial integrity. And so that raised me a question of shared value. As President Jimbo said, that Japan really believes it is in its interest to uphold the rules-based international order, and particularly the liberal trade, the economic order. But the Trump administration may believe in the law of the jungle, and they have authoritarian instincts. So, for example, if Mr. Trump decides, okay, let's compromise. Russia can get Crimea and eastern Ukraine, and China gets Taiwan, and then we get Greenland and Panama.
Okay,
How
so
Japan can
is this a question? For
how
who?
Japan will deal with that?
Okay, so I think Tom you work at the UN, right? Yeah. So Well, on the question of the UN vote on February 24th, I think the thing to say, and we're not representing the Trump administration or the current diplomats working in New York for the U.S., but I think what they would say is this is a very delicate time of negotiations, trying to get a peace settlement, and it's not the time to raise resolutions that are going to make it more difficult to have meetings with the Russians that we need to have to work on getting a peace settlement. Now, it was the Ukrainians who brought that resolution, the Europeans promoted it, and it's unfortunate that they didn't work in the UN, as you know they often do, ahead of time to try to head off this kind of a kerfuffle, which didn't, in my view, need to happen. But anyway, I would answer that particular aspect of this question that way. But I don't know, Chris and Ken, if you want to talk at all about the issue of upholding the rule. We all hope that Japan will continue to uphold the rules-based order, I think, because I think for those of us who worked in government and in diplomacy and with lots of countries around the world, we know that the rules-based order ultimately, and I feel this very strongly, and everyone in the meeting today all day long did, and I'm sure we all do, that the rules-based order is something that serves U.S. interests fundamentally, and you really can't have a functioning system in the international, functioning international system without it. But so I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I'll just say two things. First, on the Ukraine issue, I think that I totally endorse what Susan just said. The only other point that I would make is if President Biden had been reelected, we would still be confronting the question of how do we bring the conflict to an end, right? And the reality that Ukraine's not going to retake the territory that it lost. So I think no matter what, we would have been in a difficult period of diplomacy right about now. So it's probably worth letting this play out a bit before rendering judgment on it. I think maybe I'd say that. And then just on the point of values, look, I think Japan's leadership role in the region has never been more important. The standard bearer on high standard free trade agreements, engaging the global south, ensuring that economic benefits are shared more evenly across countries and across levels of development. I think promoting this minilateral cooperation that I spoke to, I think Japan's role in that is going to be more important than ever before. So I think there are times in our history, in our relationship, where one or the other of us has played the stronger regional role over the last 15 years. I think now is Japan's time and the period in which Japanese leadership is going to be needed.
Okay, Ken, you get the last word.
Sure. I think despite what Tom-san has just described, I think a track record of the voting behaviors in the UN, both in General Assembly and the UN Security Council, I think Japan and the United States share more than 90% of the same voting behavior as a track record. That really shows that United States and Japan had a common kind of viewpoint and a strategy in how to pursue those what the world might need to direct towards. But as often been reported, when we face with issue like Gaza and also recently on Ukraine, there has been I think differences of the values which has been demonstrated in the voting behavior. And that is needed. I think what Japan wish to uphold and what the United States need to pursue sometimes it's a different. And let's face it, this is the difference of the national interests and approaches that both Tokyo and Washington D.C.s are taking. But secondly, I also wish to stress that my former good friend Toshi Nakayama, who unfortunately passed away several years ago, who used to work at UN as a special assistant to the ambassador, and as he attended many of those voting kind of occasions, the UN has so many issues, including international river, the legal basis of how to manage the things, and then there's so many things. And then that he actually pushed the button to either agree or deny, and then that many of those countries may follow the Japanese voting behavior as a kind of pattern that, probably that if Japan, we don't know much about these issues, or if Japan says yes, it could be okay. And this is, if that is true, this is the kind of the confidence that the Japan has, I think, created over the past years at how much that our voting behaviors and our preparation towards the international legal orders and also how the UN should be dealing with. And this is something that I think that we should be proud of. In that sense, that how much we can lead the process to induce global south to the much more rule-based international order is the things that we do have a much more potential to be explored.
Yeah, that's absolutely, at the UN, it's all reputational capital, and it speaks to the amount of capital that Japan's been able to build up. Thank you both very much.